Rob's Country and Seed Force, taking New Zealand agriculture into the future. Welcome to this week's program. We're going to be meeting Peter Yeelans, who you may remember as the South Island Farmer of the Year, and have a look at what he's doing because he's got a field day later in the month. And also we'll be catching up with Banks Peninsula Wools and what they are up to. But first of all, management factors to minimise drench use. And
Yes.
yet there's another bit I can't pronounce.
So we're just going to mention a bit too, Rob, looking at worms and Haemonchus contortus.
So you had trouble.
Yeah,
What chance have I got if you can't?
So, to simplify that, that's the barber's pole worm.
Right.
Right,
Okay.
so, and that's something that we don't see an awful lot in Canterbury, but some summers when we've got a bit of moisture around, we haven't hit drought conditions and it's not all dried out there, we do start to see Haemonchus causing problems.
And it's
too.
prevalent in other parts of New Zealand?
Definitely prevalent, and especially the northern parts of New Zealand. Warmer areas, it relies on a warmer average temperature and a bit of moisture to survive in the environment.
Right. What is it?
So it's a stomach worm, and it differs from the other worms that we see in that you don't usually see diarrhoea in affected sheep. It feeds on blood in the stomach and causes disease through anemia, so takes large numbers, will take a lot of blood out of the system and can actually cause sudden death in lambs especially.
Very hard to tell if a sheep's looking pale.
It is, unless you're right up close and often having a look just in the tissues of the eye or in the gums, it's very hard. So
Ears droop and they look lethargic? What
they
happens?
look lethargic, they'll lag behind in the mob, they'll sickly, lying down more and just looking off colour. So something to keep in mind this time of year.
So what do you do? Prevention and cure?
Absolutely. So obviously lambs coming through at the moment, a lot of them be part of a drenching program, and that's certainly important, but we've got to remember we can't rely entirely on drenches to control our parasites. There's a lot of resistance problems out there. So the primary thing we've got to look at and remember is grazing management, utilising other stock as well to control the parasites.
Cattle first, sheep second.
Yeah, that's the way. So cross-grazing, utilising other species, they'll come through, they'll clean up a lot of the larvae on the pasture. So as when you then bring your susceptible stock through, your lambs, there's a lot less challenge for them from the parasites. You can also use your adult sheep, so adult stock, same species. They develop a level of immunity, a level of resistance to the parasites and can help to control the levels as well.
So you're focusing this mainly on young stock?
Young stock are higher risk, obviously, with all the parasites, but the barber's pole worm can certainly affect your adult sheep in high challenge times. So one of the problems we have with barber's pole, it produces huge numbers of eggs, so it contaminates the pasture really rapidly. And in Canterbury especially, where it's not a common parasite through the summer, the adult sheep may not have any level of immunity, and if they're exposed to high challenge, they can certainly get disease.
Rachel,
as well.
does it show up in fecal egg counts?
Yes, it does. So it is something.
Can you differentiate between one and the other?
Yeah, it's something that we can monitor for through regular fecal egg counts, and certainly if you're grazing a lot of young stock or with drenching programs that maybe haven't been kept up to date or question marks over whether we've got drench being effective, monitoring fecal egg counts is super important.
I guess a lot of people overlook the benefit of actually coming in and not buying anything from the veterinarian, but actually saying, this is what I've been doing, what do I do next?
Absolutely, and yeah, sitting down and looking at the system and where we're at, we can give a lot of advice on where to from here, and spending a little bit of money on some fecal egg counts, some diagnostics to actually see, have we got significant worm burdens going on? Is it time we should be drenching, and what classes of stock do we need to drench? we can actually look at putting a program in place to save you money and hopefully keep on top of things before problems emerge.
Because if you've got this barber's pole thing and it's not necessarily going to be reacting to the same drenches as your traditional.
There is issues there, and resistances can build up to within a species of worm as well. So there's specific drenches that are effective against barber's pole but not other worms. A lot of the standard drenches will get barber's pole on top of the other worms though, but it's being aware of if there's resistance problems too, because you can develop problems.
You mentioned dry, irrigation would probably help if that's the case.
So irrigation, if you're irrigating through Canterbury, you are at higher risk of having issues with barber's pole, whereas perhaps your neighbours who don't irrigate may not see it. The worm, to survive in the environment, it relies on the moisture as well, more so than some others.
So let's just recap, you're going to rest your pastures.
Absolutely. So being careful with your lamb rotations, especially coming back onto the pastures. Larvae levels are highest 2 to 3 weeks after the lambs have been on there. So bringing lambs back on within that time frame is exposing them to a huge challenge.
You're asking for trouble, aren't you?
Definitely asking for trouble. So resting your pastures and working in with a rotation that's going to reduce the challenge for them.
Cattle over first, sheep over second?
Yep, or horses even. If you've got perhaps a system with horses, 3 or 4 horses and sheep on the property, the horses can come through and clean up a lot of that larvae too.
That doesn't affect them?
No, so they're not affected by the barber's pole either. Something of note to mention though is that goats are, and alpacas and llamas are. So,
oh really?
So they're quite susceptible too.
Goats are more susceptible, and we think they've got an iron cast stomach. But
goats and parasites are extremely susceptible, and adult goats remain susceptible right through life as well. So they differ from sheep in that respect. So.
And yet they're the things that people have on livestock blocks and forget to drench.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we see problems there too. Yep.
And thank you very much indeed. So the barber's pole
worm
with an unpronounceable name, so barber's pole's fine.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks very much indeed. After the break, we meet an absolute character who's done everything from shearing to woodlots to salmon farming, I think. Well, it was definitely mussel farming anyway. And now he's New Zealand's biggest winery. Welcome back to Rob's Country. Well, he's the jack of all trades, as he says, but he reckons he's the master of none. I think he's the master of a whole lot of them myself. As I suggested, he's been a shearer, he's been doing silviculture, he's grown most things. He still currently runs big herds of cattle and flocks of sheep on blocks of land that you probably wouldn't even put rabbits on. And he's an absolute character. Peter Yeelens is the South Island Farmer of the Year this year. And he basically got into the world of vineyards the funny sort of a way by going very small steps. Unusual for him.
I bought a bit of land back in 1998, just on the outskirts of Blenheim, a little place called Grovetown. And it looked like it needed a bit of TLC, and I bought it essentially because it was cheap. Developed it into a nice park-like and area, and then ended up with 20 hectares of flat land that I had to do something. So they were putting grapes in up Rapara Road. It was the Golden Mile, and I thought, well, if it's good enough to do it up there, I'll do it down here. It was quite heavy country, and it was, a lot of people thought it wouldn't work, but it did work. And I just basically got hooked on it. Loved the idea, and it gave me a good opportunity to do a bit of sculpturing on the land. And so I went out from there, and I was introduced to a large piece of land up in the North Bank, which was a bit of a godforsaken hole on the shady side of the valley, and spent a year with a lot of machinery clearing gorse and broom and willows and old riverbed and stuff, and made that into a lovely vineyard. And fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know, but anyway, I was hounded by a buyer who was keen on it, so I gave into temptation and sold it. And I used the proceeds from that to come out here and start at Seaview.
How big an area is Seaview?
We've got this whole land mass here that's all adjoining is 1,150 hectares, and 1,000 of that is under canopy. And 700 hectares of Savvy. There's about 100 hectares of Pinot Gris. In fact, we're the largest Pinot Gris growers in the country. We've got just over 100 hectares of Pinot Noir, and then there's another 100 odd hectares of what I call fruit salad, and that there is made up of Gewürztraminer, Tempranillo, Riesling, Viognier, and odd other species or variety.
Must be mechanical because there's a lot of vines under 1,000 acres.
Yeah, it's a big operation. I think it's the biggest single vineyard in Australasia. Here we run a massive fleet of John Deere tractors and plank harvesters. So we do everything ourselves. We harvest our grapes, we manage them and harvest them and process them. We've got a fleet of trucks and got a good crew here. We run a very efficient operation, as you can do with a bit of scale. I think this year we're hoping to harvest about 20,000 tonne, which is puts us up there. So, yep, very, very fortunate.
Tell me about your compost.
Oh well, compost is something that I'm pretty keen on, but I've always been a composter from the day I had my garden at home, and I could see a lot of waste in the industry, and I thought there's an opportunity here, and there sure is. So when a winery operates, about 20 to 25% of the tonnage goes to waste. That's skins and seeds, and of course we produce 4,000 or 5,000 tonne ourselves, and we collect waste from the rest of the wine industry. So this year we'll probably do 30,000 tonne plus of what we call grape marc that comes out here. Now, to make that into good compost you need other ingredients, and you'll see the shell, and we also get sawdust and bark from the local sawmills, and I have a consent to take seaweed off the beach out in front here. But we get a lot of seaweed come in with a mussel shell. I also own a quarry where there's lime, and it's very soluble lime that we're able to just scrape off the surface with a digger, and we mix that in. There's no real recipe. The recipe changes seasonally. As we get low on grape marc, we end up putting more sawdust in, and vice versa. So, but it really, really works. It's tremendous for water retention. Gets the worms going. The worms come up and they mix the topsoil into the subsoil, and you get good soil, good balance on your soil. The rest all happens. So,
full-time job, because once you get to the end of it, you're going to have to start again.
Yep, it's going to take us a good 4 years to get across the vineyard at the rate we go. We apply about 300 tonne a day, and there's a dedicated person to doing that. We're in the middle of building another applicator, so we'll have two going, and there's a person full-time collecting and mixing the compost, and really he's pretty strung out, so there'll be another one in the mix before long. So it's a good part of our operation, and it saves us buying some of the nutrition, although we still put a lot of other nutrition on.
Chooks and ducks everywhere.
Yeah, a bit of a menagerie. The chooks are great. We've got about 150 spread over about 12 chook houses around the vineyard, and they're nice to have. Of course, they deliver us a lot of eggs, which we give to the staff, and we also give to the old folks' home or whatever. And the ducks are just part of the wetlands. We've got 25, 30 odd wetlands around here, and some are developed, some aren't, but the ducks are fitting in there, and we've also introduced trout and freshwater crayfish into those. And I don't know if you've seen it yet, but we've got solar lights that come on at night time, and they lure the grass grub beetle when it's flying, and they land on the water around the solar lights, and the old trout come up and get them. Now, you can see them early in the morning at the right time, and they're rising everywhere. So it works. It just shows you that you don't have to use a lot of chemicals. There's other ways of fixing things.
Where do the Kuni Kunis fit in?
Kuni Kunis I got as a bit of a trial. I actually like them. You know, they're a very intelligent animal, more intelligent than a dog. They're friendly, they are fearless, and they will eat grass. So these ones here, they don't go rooting up the ground, or occasionally they might, if there's a bit of a puddle, have a bit of a walla, but essentially they live 95% off grass, and we bring down a few goodies for them. That's just so that we can keep them controlled, if you like. They'll come to the core. They're not fenced. Often we'll find them down on the beach, you know, looking for a pippy or a cockerel on the beach, and they always come back home. So they're a delight to have. People love them. Can't do it at the moment, but often you can actually give them a scratch and they'll turn over on their side, feet up. And of course, when they're young, they're really, really cute. So they look after themselves and they don't do any harm, and there's only positive stuff come from it.
Your winery is a world leader?
Yeah, it is. It's a world leader in more ways than one. We've been recognised as having the most sustainable winery and vineyard in the world, you know, by global authorities, and very nice to get that. And we've also been recognised as 2012 as to having made the best Sauvignon Blanc in the world, and that's out of, you know, thousands of entries, you know, globally, and judged many, many times, all blind. So, you know, that's we're pretty chuffed about that. So yeah, we've got a good, sharp, modern, efficient winery sitting in the middle of a very, very big vineyard, and everything leans to us being able to make quality wine.
It's a lovely story, because you do have a story. Gives the marketing people a fair bit to do as well, though, doesn't it?
It keeps them busy. Yeah, no, we've got teams, you know, around the world. We've got a good team in Australia and in the UK and Europe and in Sao Paulo, of all places. We make a massive part of New Zealand's exports into Brazil, and it's not hard to sell good wine. It's hard to keep getting enough of it.
You're working very close with nature here, really, aren't you? And yet you're not organic and greeny, as it were. You've still got a really good.
Yeah, we're all about sustainability, and you know, we are as organic as you can be, and being practical. And I think it's a good fit. It's all about you leaving some wood in the cabin for the next visitor, and making sure that your grandchildren and great-grandchildren have got something to come home to. So that's what we're about.
Where to from here? Have you got it ticking over so you can start to relax a bit?
Yeah, I'm working on it. I'm working on it.
I don't think you'll ever be bored, Peter.
No, you know, there's lots of other things I'd like to do. I can see lots of opportunities, but we've got a wee bit more work to do here yet.
You're looking at it as a tourist venture, so people can come and cruise around and have a look?
Well, I'd love to. I'd love to build a floating, revolving restaurant up at what we call Lookout Point. So I'm working on it, but I don't think it will work financially, because we just don't have the population here. Mind you, it'd be good fun trying.
You've never stepped down from a challenge yet?
Oh, well, no, I haven't. It's a sure way of getting me going, is giving me one, but yeah.
And the other thing is, you're really still very hands-on. You still drive bulldozers and you still get out there and do stuff.
Yeah, when they let me. I get out. I'm probably not as a good a hand as I used to be, but nowadays if I go out and grade the roads, I get comment afterwards, but I still give it a good go, yeah.
You must have a pretty good team.
I've got a bloody good team. I've got the best team in the country.
And that's because people are the main ingredient?
They sure are, yeah. It's all one big family here, and you know, if you give, you get.
An amazing property. What an amazing man. You only heard some of the stuff that he does. For example, he's got solar-powered speakers that put music out over the vines, because the vines love the music and they're performing better. The chooks who are near the music lay bigger eggs than those who aren't. And that's only the tip of the iceberg about what Peter Yealand is up. I think if you can get to his field day later this month, it's an absolute must. But after the break, we're going to be talking with Roddy McKinnon. back to Rob's country. Inflation is going up, the interest rates are going up, so you guys will be busy throughout the country doing prepaids.
Well, yes, we are actually. It's this time of year. It seems to be. It's if we have a season, I guess. This is the season when people often get their affairs in order. I think it's all part of that New Year's resolution. And so yes, we have noticed, and we do notice at this time of year, people putting their affairs in order, for want of a better phrase. Not because they're anticipating that they're going to need it anytime soon, but just often it's a good time. Families have gathered and had a bit of a chat and asked pertinent questions and decided to get some of the financial details to one side. So we have access to a variety of, shall we say, vehicles, for want of a better term, that allow people to put money aside for a funeral. And to be honest, I'm not a particular advocate of any of them. I'm a big fan of the shoebox under the bed, to be honest, because the way interest rates are going at the moment, and that the way funeral trusts tend to be run, which are intensely conservative things, so because they're safe, people might be better off just watching the interest rates and taking a better return on a simple savings account, particularly if they can get one with no fees. Because a lot of the funeral trusts have small fees because they're managed, and they're managed by third parties. So we have the bulk of our clients are in a couple of trusts, one that we run personally and one that the Funeral Directors Association has mandated, and that is the one that the government recently asked them to set up. And that's good trust. Money's in Westpac, and it's well run. The actuaries that are working on it and the administration team are doing a bang-up job, and it's exceeded its expectations. So
it's interest-bearing, is it?
It is interest-bearing, but the problem with the trust is because if you lock up money, large chunks of money, to get the best interest rates, you have to lock them in. But if somebody passes away, you've got to be able to get that money out and break them. And so a lot of the money has to be, there's a certain amount of money on call, a certain amount of money on short term, medium term, long term, and so forth, to try and get an overall average to keep the interest rate as high, at least as high as inflation. But inflation, while it's artificially kept low in New Zealand, at least in theory, doesn't actually keep pace with the consumer price increases. And so we never look at a trust, a funeral funds put away, as going to be future-proofed. They had to be viewed as money towards a funeral. In fact, I believe you could, by the end of this next year, I would suggest that interest rates in savings accounts will be over 6%. At the moment, you're getting about 4 to 5. And then at that level, you should start to see some accumulation, particularly if you put it out at compounding. So I think it's one of those, speak to your usual investment advisor scenarios, but there are, it's not a bad idea to put money to a side, because it is means tested when people go into aged care, and you can set aside $10,000 per individual. That isn't means tested, so it's one way of putting some assets to one side that the government won't get their hooks into, and that's totally legal, and we encourage people to do that. And at the moment, $10,000 will cover most funerals in most scenarios, but $10,000 won't cover a funeral in 5 years' time. Just the cost of cemeteries alone has far exceeded inflation, and we've noticed that particularly that. Families who bought plots 5-6 years ago pay literally half of what our families are paying today if they're buying them as an at-need scenario.
What's your advice to people, I guess our age and younger, who want to...
Is that you and me, Rob?
I was actually trying to pretend I was close to you.
Oh, we are very close, Rob, yeah.
Family situation and the children wanting to get things sorted. How the hell do they broach that with two parents who really don't want to talk about falling off the perch?
I think the way they do it is, particularly these days, is often families live away from mum and dad, and they come in periodically to visit. It might be for an event, a family event, a birthday, it might be for Christmas or so on. I mean, a huge amount of New Zealanders live overseas. There's 800,000 of us Kiwis living in Australia. So my guess is that most of those are working age, and the ones that are back here are their parents. So my thought is that it's a conversation that many people are expecting their children to have with them, and that the fear of broaching it is vastly exaggerated. I think it's very, very simple, and say, we all know that we're going to pass away. All right.
Death and taxes, right?
Death and taxes. We know that's going to happen, but at the same time, most of us want a modicum of control. So we want to, say how we shuffle this mortal coil to a certain extent. So we believe very much in having the conversation with the families. What are your wishes? What would you like us to do when the time comes, so we don't have a fight? Put it bluntly.
Because, I mean, seriously, your family turns up for some good fun times, and the last thing you want to do is talk about, you know,
they do, but I think at the same time, most families, if they're honest, if they look back over the best times families had together, they were around quite significant events that were very stressful. Weddings, the arrival of children, the death of a loved one. Often people look back and the last time I saw you was at Mum's funeral. Yeah,
exactly.
And so I think families are quite separated by time and distance now. And so they often look to these occasions to re-establish connections. And yes, you don't want to walk out. But I've had these conversations with my father, and he's miles off.
He's
and
actually my age too.
Well, exactly. But
so I should be worried now that my children are
Rob, how are you feeling? No, I think it's having the conversation early, so it doesn't feel like it's that you're there sort of on tenterhooks waiting for them to pass away. It's have it 10 years before you need to have the conversation, because you never know. It might be 20 or 30 years, but it doesn't matter. Once there's a few details written down and a few decisions are made.
Exactly. Very briefly, there's a bit of a trend for country folk, for example, to have a service on the farm or in the
Reclaim the country. Stop the country coming to the town. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense to me for someone who has spent their entire life on the hinterland to come into town to be buried. There's great cemeteries out there. We should utilise them.
So that's the new trend. I mean, that's the sort of thing that's
more
happening.
And more often, have them on the farm. How many good parties have you had in the woolshed, Rob?
Well, there's a few of them, actually, when I was a lot younger. When I was probably younger than you. But no, seriously, there's some beautiful gardens out there, and some of the services that I've been to have been superb with the surroundings.
Oh, and the other thing is you have the ability to tailor-make it. You can throw up a marquee, you can do it as simple as, sandwiches and cakes in the bottom of Mum's garden. It can be anything from something grand to something quite intimate. At the same time, it's the familiar surroundings that you're in control of, and often it is the best memories are built around familiar scenarios.
Exactly, and as we said, that's the way the family...
Exactly, and you look at, we had the situation where people, there's the creek that Dad got the tractor stuck in, and those sorts of stories come in, and it's all that sort of thing, and do you remember when we used to have to do the lambing beat before we got the motorbike, and those sorts of things.
Those things come out.
Exactly.
Right. Thank you very much indeed. And it's not all bad after all, is it, really? After the break, we're going to be talking to Kerry Moore about Rural Women, New Zealand. Welcome back to Rob's Country. Kerry, education.
Yes, start of the school year again. A lot of kids out there sort of nervous, new schools, new teachers, new friends, all sorts of things happening. So obviously a reminder to people about slowing down around schools and school buses. We've had several weeks where traffic hasn't had to think about it. So
20 Ks.
20 Ks either way, that's right, and slowing down around the schools as well. So just getting people back into that mindset of keeping our kids safe, and of course the new school bus sign trial is still underway in Mid-Canterbury, getting onto the last phase of that with a survey about the change in perceptions and how much people have understood, and whether it's actually been a successful sign in terms of changing behaviour. So lots are happening.
Do you think
there.
it is getting
Certainly
through?
The indications from a lot of the bus drivers are that it has changed behaviour. The
Well
signs
done
in
you.
conjunction with the promotion and publicity about it has seen quite a change. So you're really hopeful that it'll translate into action in terms of having those buses on those signs on the buses nationally. And
it sounds as though it's happening, Kerry, naturally rather than the police.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And it's great to see that the message is getting through, and it's really encouraging. And bus drivers are very happy, and the kids themselves are commenting on it. So it's a great thing.
Yeah, that's good.
And of course, start of the year and election year, and that different parties have opened the election lolly tin and come out with all sorts of things about education.
There's moths coming out of some of them, but
there are. I mean, and everyone's got a different viewpoint, and whilst you can have great things going on, more money to support and teachers with, make sure we've got good quality teaching and they're well supported in terms of professional development and so on. But having good teachers is only part of the problem. And keeping our children well educated, and it's about also making sure the children are in the right space to learn. And there's a whole heap of other issues. So other ideas about having hubs of social services and so on to support learning are great, if you've got fully resourced, funded and supported social services available in those areas, and that's going to be an issue of how that actually works in implementation in rural sectors where there aren't the great range of support services.
Wasn't that long ago, seemingly, that we had a lot of rural schools closed? Are they opening up again because of dairying in the areas like Canterbury, Southland?
Schools aren't reopening, no, but roles are rising a little bit. But with dairying, they fluctuate. You've got that great middle of the year, Gypsy Day, the roll goes up and down as children leave and come into an area. So there's a lot of changes.
That must be tough on students.
It's very tough on kids who will change a school every year.
And
it's
in the
also
middle of it.
And in the middle of the year, so they're at different stages of the curriculum, so that you never quite know where they're going. But it's also tough on the children who don't move because they've made all these friends who then suddenly up and leave. So it's actually very difficult for children, and teachers are having to deal with those sort of emotional problems that children haven't, lost friendships and building relationships and trust with friendships, and all those things happen. And you've got school bullying. You've also got issues around, split families. A lot of teachers talk about, on Fridays they've got kids upset because they're going, to the other parent for the weekend. Then on Monday they're picking up the pieces of what's happened over the weekend, and then they've gone back to the main parents. So there's a whole heap of social issues that are impacting on children's ability to focus on learning. And throwing into all of that mix, you've got all this new technology. And it's great having new technology and having our children well prepared for the world they're going to be living and working in the future. But it's also creating issues for families when you've got children who are now expected to have their own laptops. You've got primary school children who are told they need to have their own tablet for school. Now, that's putting a huge onus back on the family to provide this extra technology. It's wonderful to have it in the classroom, but when it starts becoming a requirement at home as well, you've got children coming home needing to do computer-based homework. Wonderful if you have a home computer. And if you don't, the child is then disadvantaged because they can't do their homework, which supports their at-school learning. And it might be okay for one-child families to provide a computer or a tablet, but if you've got more than one child and they've all got computer homework to do, how do you then facilitate that in the home to make sure that they've all got computer time and they're all learning and able to meet those homework requirements?
And they're all about $1,000 each.
Exactly. So, are you seeing families having to provide 1, 2, 3, 4 different laptops and then have them all connected at home so that they can do their homework? There's huge issues back in the home about technology in education. So I think as much as it's a wonderful thing at school, there needs to be some consideration of how that's impacting on families, the affordability for families to be able to support that education, which parents want to do.
Yeah, you always come up with these things and I go, well, what is the answer? Is there a magic wand, Kerry?
Well, I don't know. And it's hopefully, it's an issue that a lot of families face. And, you've got parties now with all the education policies which only seem to be dealing with different aspects of it. That we need to have a much more global view of education and how it's being delivered and how it can be supported and obviously funded.
You need to talk to Ms. Parata, don't you?
We
yes,
do.
indeed.
We do.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Banks Peninsula Walls. You saw a brief look at them last week when we talked to Huey about the fact that he was giving up. I want to know a bit about the history because it looks as though they're going to grab Romney Wools and make them happen.
About 6 years ago, our discussion group decided to do something about our returns on wool. We realised that for a long period, something in excess of 25 years, we were receiving unsustainable prices. In other words, we were unprofitable as a business. And sheep sheep are a fantastic dual-purpose animal where they produce meat and wool. So we believed wool had to play an important part, and so we established a group of us. We decided to go to the market and try and link our wool with an end user. And I've got to say it's been hard, it's been slow, taken a lot longer than what we thought, but we now have a linkage from this wool here right through to the consumer and those rugs there. So we're taking our wool direct from farm as a unified group of 44 growers. We take it direct to Scour and Timaru, and then we ship it direct to Europe and it goes into spinning and then finally into carpets. And just more recently, which is probably when I say recently, 12 months, we've been working with a Chinese manufacturer who manufacture hand-tufted rugs. And so we've got within our group, we've got Jackie Chamberlain, who is an artist, and she's designed these particular rugs. And we've got this hand tufter in China, who's probably one of the best hand tufters in China, if not in the world, manufacturing these on a commission basis for us.
Now, Romney's tried to do it and did it. What makes you so different that you're successful?
I don't think we can claim success yet. In fact, I think we're a long way away from claiming success around marketing rugs. We are successful in shifting our wool very efficiently to market with a stable price system where we know what we're getting for our wool for the next 12 months. And for that reason, our growers have been very, very committed to, one, produce quality wool, but two, commit to that price for the year. And the price has got to be attractive, and it is attractive to a grower. So we're putting wool back into profitability, not only on Banks Peninsula, but with a wider group of growers associated with Wools of New Zealand, and BP Wool Growers, BP Farms is part of that initiative as well.
Are you breed specific?
Generally, we are Romney based. There's a few Perrindale guys and there's a few other breeds, but generally Romney based, and we're very consistent in our genetic base on Banks Peninsula, where there's probably only 4 breeders supply the bulk of the rams into our flocks, and so we get a consistent white bright wool which is very strong, and that's what the market desires. If you look at our brand rug at the back, it's distinctly black and white. If you want a very well dyed black wool, you have to have a bright white wool to start with, and you won't get it any other way. If you bleach it, you weaken the fibre. We don't bleach wool. This is exactly what goes into the scour. It washes really white. It comes out with a minus colour, so it's got a YZ of something like -2 when it goes into the box to go to the other side of the world. All our scoured bales have our brand attached to it. Everything we do has our brand attached to it. So we're building value out of that.
You're the chair for Wools New Zealand. How does that tie in?
Well, when we established ourselves as Banks Peninsula Wool Growers, 3 of us went to the market, and we quickly learned that as growers, we couldn't do this on our own. We needed to link with people with expertise. So it doesn't matter whether it's a transport operator, whether it's our shearers and shed hands, whether it's the scourers or whether it's the market people in the world. And we learned a hell of a lot in the market about Wools of New Zealand, the value of the brand, the value of the relationships that's been built for the last 20 years. And I read a book about the same time where it said the average brand lasts 8 months. Well, you know, for this brand, Wools of New Zealand, to be around for 20 years, that's really, really significant for us as a platform to establish ourselves. The only thing missing was it wasn't connected commercially with the wool. So what we've done with Wools of New Zealand is establish that as a commercial entity, and we're now moving wool through Wools of New Zealand to various parts of the world under a branded strategy. And that in itself will add a hell of a lot of value to not only the wool, but to the shareholders' investment in the company.
Where are you going to sell the rugs?
Our key focus at the moment, and look, we're very much testing the water. Each one of us as directors has purchased one of these rugs, so we're self-funding it. We will not carry stock, and I think that's been one of the mistakes of the past. So these are custom-made rugs. We'll have a range of 10 to 20 rugs that you can go on the net and order on the net, or you can go into 2 of the shops in Akaroa, Beach Road or Sabuge, which are ladies' fashion shops, and those rugs will be available there. So our target market is the local tourists or the tourists that come to Akaroa, the cruise ship industry, and there's something like 120,000 tourists coming into Akaroa annually now by cruise ship, and thirdly on the net. You know, the world is our opportunity, I guess. And our story around our wool, our growers, and you know the artists, and you know that whole story is told on the net.
And each one's individual. There'll never be 2 like it.
Well, I think within these rugs there might be 30 of each type maximum for sale, and they will turn into collector's items. They'll have an individual number, they'll have a plaque that goes with them, and as you'll notice, and I think this is actually quite unique, we've got our brand on top of the rug. And I think we've learned a lot from Merino and Icebreaker and those guys where they put the logo on the outside, and we all look at it, and that's what everybody wears on their shirts. Why can't we have it on rugs in the same way? So that's why you see our brand on there now, and we think that's a real significant point of difference.
And I think he needs to be congratulated, he and the team, and I did make a slight error there. It's not Banks Peninsula Wools, it's Banks Peninsula Farms. And well done, Mark and team. After the break, we're going to be talking about Federated Farmers and what they're doing to help your cause. Welcome back to Rob's Country. Red meat reform, you guys are right into it.
So Federated Farmers have put out a discussion paper on red meat industry reform options. So that's come out of our hardworking Wellington office.
Yep.
Comments are supposed to be back by the end of this month, but the Meat and Fibre Council will meet on the 17th to 18th of February to look at all the feedback. So farmers who haven't seen it yet and want to see it can access it off the members only section of Federated Farmers website.
And they obviously have a special number to get on that.
You use your membership number to get on that, and if you haven't done it before, it's the usual story. You log on with your membership number, you do a password, they send you back a link, and away you go.
Sounds good, yeah.
So it's pretty easy. I guess the main thing that I say to sheep and beef farmers around this whole red meat industry reform is to think about the outcomes that we want as farmers rather than worrying too much about the structure of how you put it together. We've had a lot of this generic talk about improving profitability, but no one's actually really sitting down and saying, well, what do we mean by profitability? Is that higher prices, more stable prices? Is it less market vulnerability? Is it all of those things? Is it just lamb? Is it beef as well? So if we can start focusing more clearly on what those outcomes are, and also thinking about as producers, what are the barriers for us to achieving consistent supplies for our meat companies, then we can start looking at how we have to, what we need to do in the system to get those outcomes.
So it's very much work in progress at this stage, Linda.
It is a work in progress, and the discussion document itself has received quite a bit of praise in the media. It's also had its critics, but I would say I read it, I thought it was a great background document for anybody who wants to understand a little bit more about how the process works and what all the different options are and what other countries do. And yeah, it's a really great platform to move forward, and I think it's starting to get us away from this. There's a bit of a notion that, you know, adopt the Fonterra structure, you will get the Fonterra results, but we're different products, different markets.
Yeah,
you know,
you may not want the result either. I mean, seriously, it's a different game, isn't it? It's apples and pears.
It's a totally different game, and that's why I was sort of saying, you know, go back to clearly articulating what the outcomes are you want to achieve first.
Yep.
And then the rest should follow from there.
That sounds good. Stake in the ground. Health and safety.
Yes, we've not been off to our flashest start,
No,
certainly in Canterbury, and I think in a few other places too. We've managed to chalk up quite a few accidents already, some of them with really catastrophic results. And I guess it's a really timely reminder about the importance of health and safety policy, and the fact that every farm is supposed to have a health and safety policy or a health and safety plan, whether you employ people or not. So a lot of people think, oh, I don't employ staff, I don't need this. You are supposed to have one now. You've got to cover visitors, contractors, you've got to cover yourselves, obviously. Someone said something last night in a meeting about, well, it's all just common sense, and a lot of it is, but there are a couple of things around that. It might all just be common sense, but it needs to be written into a plan in order to comply with the law. If you don't, there are penalties, and they have dollar signs next to them, and they're not small. On top of that, and probably more importantly, in my view, sitting down or walking around the farm and completing these plans and just taking the opportunity to look at what's going on could well prevent an accident.
I think, though, that comment about it's all common sense, I mean, people are going to say we don't need to point out to somebody who walks onto the property that there's an irrigation ditch full of water, or there's a pond full of water, because it's obvious. But you still do. You
still do, but it's, you know, we think it's obvious, but not always. We've had an incident in Canterbury where a young man was unfortunately killed when he was riding his bike and hit an irrigation gun. So he was in his normal trail thing, but something had happened and that gun was there. He went over his jump and hit it. So we're not saying that these health and safety plans won't prevent all accidents from happening. Of course they won't, but they do two things. First of all, when that terrible thing does happen, if you've got your health and safety plan, then on top of all that personal trauma, you're not going to have the Eagle Beagles from WorkSafe New Zealand growling at you and doing whatever they want to do because you haven't complied with the law. And secondly, it may be that, you know, they do, you know, it's not just the obvious physical things on the farm, it's quite often the things that you do as well.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people want to ban horses because when you think of the number of injuries whistling off the back or over the front of a horse.
Yes, absolutely.
But I mean, that's another whole different subject, I know. But as far as just farms and hazards are concerned, it's, I mean, you look at people digging ditches in Christchurch and they're wearing a hard hat, like, hello?
Yeah, but I mean, it's a legal requirement to have them. You can get them from feds. They're as cheap as chips. You don't have to be a member to buy the health and safety plans that we offer and use them, and it does make you compliant with the law.
Yep. And
so
that's
it's one,
I mean,
it's one
bottom
less
line is
thing.
then you've got to do it. It's like like paying your GST. You've got to do it.
You've got to do it. Absolutely, and
it's the way it's where we live.
It is where we live and what we do. So.
Well, the neat thing is that your phone number, as in Federated Farmers number, is going to be right on people's screen as of now. I'm Rob Cope-Williams. You've either been watching or you've just missed Rob's Country, but I will be back at the same time next week. Until then, bye now. Seed Force. If it's not in the green bag, it's not a Seed Force seed.